Glad to be here. Yeah, we're going to be talking about the Cascade with sheeting action. It's the C in CHSS, Cascading HTML style sheets, first proposed by Holcomb Lee in 1994. So what's that been? A while. The first browser released by Sir Tim and the team at CERN was the Hypermedia Browser and Editor, and it was designed for this next machine with this fancy futuristic graphic interface. But you can't make a web that's worldwide by saying it works on my machine and everyone else is an edge case. So they released the second browser, and it's less powerful, less graphically interesting. It's a text-only browser. You can navigate it with a keyboard. You don't even need to install it on your own computer. You can just log into the CERN servers and start browsing the web from any machine with an internet connection. This becomes the mission statement of the web. Web for all, web on everything. And everything is a lot of things. This image is incomplete and out of date. And it includes devices, assistive technology, with all sorts of different interfaces, and then devices without any screen at all. And so this is a problem for the new technology. If we really want HTML to be a common language across all platforms, that's going to present some challenges, different UIs. So that implies no device-specific markup or anything which requires control over fonts or colors. Sir Tim said that on the first website in 1990. Web design is just never going to happen. Thank you. Any questions? And it's not a technical problem. There was already digital design, there were PDFs, that's not the problem. The problem is political, because all technology is political. Everything we do is political. Yes. The problem is us having control. That's the problem of the web, because we're not alone here. We're collaborating with the browsers who are providing some basic styles to get things going, making headings big and bold, space between paragraphs, making sure that links are visible. Even the second browser, the line mode browser there, it has to do some of this styling, right? It's not without styles. Just because it's text, you need styles to render text. We also have users bringing their own devices, and all sorts of users with their own preferences. And like Hida said, the browser is literally the agent of the user, and it represents their needs on the web. And so on the early web, all styles are universal. I mean, they're different from one person to the next, but not from one site to the next. Any site you go to, your styles and your browser's styles apply to that site, and the site is not able to provide any styles of its own. The entire web, and this is the fundamental vision of the platform that we're working on, is controlled by the user and their choices, not by us. So, and when I'm talking about users of the web, I'm also talking about us, right? All of us started as web users, and all of us are still web users. I use the web more than I build it. I used to worry that by setting my preferences in my browser, I'd be seeing something different from my users. And I've realized that that's fundamentally backwards. That's the whole fucking point. I want to set my preferences so that I can see where they pop up, and where they're respected, and where they're not being respected. So go set your preferences. Make it your own, make the web your own, and see what happens. See where your fonts pop up, see where your colors pop up, see where your font sizes are respected or not. So in 1993, Mosaic browser came out, and they added the image tag. This was before web standards. They didn't ask permission. They released a browser and said, here's an image tag. And suddenly, web design is possible. You have total control on your website of all of the design, but it breaks everything. This is no longer a web on everything for everyone. So this was a real problem for the platform. The web could have become a giant fax machine where pictures of text would be passed along. This was a huge fear, and there's a whole range of proposals to solve the problem, all of them coming around 1993, 1994, trying to save the web from the image tag. We're trying to provide publishers, that's us, with some stylistic influence to make the web more interesting while still leaving the user with the last word. And specifically in Håkon's proposal, he's trying to provide both of us with the same syntax for doing this. We have the same notation. We can all write CSS. That's still true in Safari. You can go upload your user style sheet, and it will all apply to all websites. It's a little bit harder to write a user style sheet these days, but you can do it. Most other browsers have moved to this model where they provide you with a graphic interface for setting some preferences, and it's a limited set, but it's basically just Dreamweaver for users. They're writing the CSS for you. We still get CSS out the other end. We get these declarations, color blue, a property and a value, and then we can wrap those up into selectors and attach them to elements and collect those into entire style sheets that we link from the document. And the result is an ordered list or cascade of style sheets. That term is there in the first proposal. But of course, there's a problem here, right? I mean, even without the browser and user providing styles, and without all three of us not being coordinated, even just myself writing styles on my site, I will run into conflicts. I can give this button 3 different colors, and one of them is fake, and what is the browser supposed to do with that information? As far as the browser is concerned, to render the page, it needs to find every HTML element on the page, every DOM element, and it needs to go through all 560 some CSS properties, and it needs to find exactly one value for each of the 560 properties on every single element in the DOM. That's what the browser does to render the page. So this is where the cascade comes into play. It's an algorithmic Thunderdome where 2 styles enter and only 1 can leave. So we have this whole process, and there's 7 steps now. Proximity is only in a few browsers, but coming. But we've got origins and important all the way down. You'll see selector specificity is near the end. I think a lot of people refer to specificity as the cascade. It is a step down near the end of the cascade. And then at the very end, we have order of appearance. And those are the 2 that we talk about the most. So we've already seen the first 2 origins. This is the first step of the cascade, and it's also the first reason we have the cascade is solving this problem. Who goes first? Who overrides who? So the user agent already provided some styles, and the user was able to provide preferences, and the user's preferences just override the browser styles by default. And it doesn't matter the specificity. Origins override each other in order no matter what specificity we use. That's why our styles always win over browser styles and over user preferences, which seems like a bit of a problem, right? We're the bad guys here, stomping around force choking everybody. So, but Håkon realized this, right? And if conflicts arise, the user is supposed to have the last word. That's how it's supposed to work. There's supposed to be balance in this universe. And it's why we have importance. When we use important styles, 3 new origins are created, and they go in reverse order. So our styles don't go very far, right? We just override ourselves. We were already overriding the user and the browser, but when they use important styles, they override us. And that's the purpose of importance. We create this alternate timeline where everybody has goatees. And yes, the browser styles do use importance. They use it in places that we just think we're not allowed to go there. But this is how they ensure that we don't go there. Users can also set importance, and some of the graphic interfaces for setting preferences have a checkbox where users can basically turn off and on importance for their entire style sheet. This is the purpose of importance, not for us to override each other, getting in petty fights with our colleagues, but to protect styles from future things in the cascade that would otherwise override us. And specifically for users to be able to do that. And it makes sense that we don't always understand this broader context of the cascade because our styles are sort of stuck together there in the central origins. So we can start to think that we're the center of the universe and not just some pale blue dot off to the side of a larger cascade. We're thinking about specificity. It's over here. It's right by us. So let's talk about it. Selectors exist for selecting things. That seems obvious. Right, so we get different sort of abstractions for this, right? We can select a specific thing. There should only be one use of an ID on a page, so we can select that thing, or we can select a whole class of things. That's useful. We can style faster that way. We can select a type of thing, like a paragraph or a list. Or we can just select every element on the page. So we've got these sort of different abstractions. And selectors are great. They make styling more efficient. We can select a lot of things at once, and also more expressive. We can be very clear. We can write these entire sentences about what we're trying to select. So here we're selecting the type submit button inside of a form that has something invalid inside of it, right? A very expressive sentence that is both readable, if you understand CSS, to humans and also to the machine, because, yeah. So the cascade then comes along and adds specificity. And specificity isn't the point of a selector. It's just this heuristic assumption attached to it. We're looking at how specifically is a selector targeting elements. And we sort of assume that we're going to start with broad, generic styles, and then later we're going to come along with more specific styles. We're going to paint in a broad brush, and then we're going to come in and do the details later. And so we want those targeted styles to override our broad styles. And this sort of matches what Harry Roberts calls the inverted triangle of CSS. The broader the reach, the lower the specificity, and the less explicit our styles are in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. So we paint in broad strokes broadly, and then we do details very specifically. And Harry suggests that most of our code should be at the top of that, and then we write less and less code as we get into more and more detail. And he sort of breaks this down into layers, settings and tools at the top. Those might be in our preprocessors or JavaScript or whatever, and then we start to get to, we can see that these a little bit match the different selector levels, right? Generic styles that might be universal, element styles that could be attached to an element type, and then we've got objects created out of classes and attributes, and then specific components might be able to have an ID, and then overrides at the end, maybe that's where importance gets involved. And we sort of attach numbers to these things. This is not actually specificity. It doesn't use Markov logic, but whatever, something like that. But out of all of these, and they're all very useful, only one of them is completely flexible. We don't control what is targeted by the universal selector. We don't control what's targeted by the type selectors. We only control where classes and attributes are applied. We can name them whatever we want. We can create as many as we want. We can put them wherever we want. We have total flexibility in that level. And then IDs have to be unique, so again, we have pretty limited control. And what we find is we get into big arguments over how many classes and attributes are we allowed to use. And we develop these intricate conventions to make sure we're using only the right number. And then if we're sort of removing all of our specificity, we're down to one class or attribute, everything has the same specificity. All that we're left with is scope proximity, which hasn't shipped yet, and order of appearance. So then we have to carefully manage not just the convention names, but also the order of our code so that like This is again from Harry Roberts. The idea is that like our specificity should only increase through the document so that we're matching the specificity and the order of appearance. But then somebody comes along and throws in importance. Thank you all for the slides. It's very helpful. And everything can go wrong, right? Everything breaks. Even the best heuristics, and I think specificity is a pretty good heuristic on its own, but it's just an assumption, and it's going to break down at some points. We need explicit tools to deal with these sorts of things to really say what our priorities are. And that's where we get cascade layers. So you're maybe asking, what's cascade layering? Is it really inadvertent and reckless? I hope not. Cascade layers have been around in all browsers since 2022. They're widely supported. If you haven't been using them because you're worried, you should start using them. They start with the @layer rule, and you can optionally provide a name. And by optionally, I mean almost always, unless you're writing a framework with some very specific use cases, you're going to want to name your layers. And they just exist to prevent specificity leaks. So specificity applies within a layer, but not between layers. Layers override each other, and then specificity is only considered within. It's contained, and the higher layer wins first. So layer order is determined by the order we introduce the name of the layer. So if we create a layer named default, and it's the first one we create, there it is, it's the least powerful. If we add a theme layer, that will override our default layer, and if we add a components layer, and it's just the order here. If we rearrange these, they would have a different priority order. And then unlayered styles, anything that we don't put in a layer, is more important than our layered styles. We wanted to do sort of the opposite of importance. We're pulling things down in the priority order, and then we're able to move them around. So let's actually play with this live. Oh, that code is kind of small. Is that still pretty small for the back? Okay. So we've just got two H1 selectors here. The first one is setting the background to teal, and then we're setting the background to the best color, medium violet red. I mean, both of these are pretty good colors, let's be honest. But we could change the specificity of one, and then the specificity happens before order of appearance. So specificity wins in this case. But we could also add layers. And so a layer by default lowers the priority of something. We can name that layer if we want. We can just layer 1. But if we have multiple layers, let's add layer 2. Now we see the H1 winning because layer 2 is a higher layer because it was introduced later. So we're back to the sort of order of these mattering for which one is going to win. If I did layer 1 again, we're back to the situation, oh, I've got a broken. So now these are in the same layer again, and CodePen wants me to save my work. These are in the same layer again, so we're back to using specificity. So they can be in the same layer because I just declared the layer twice, or because I literally put them in the same layer. Either way, it's the same thing. We can come back to layers. So the order of our code doesn't need to matter as much anymore because we can take things later in the document and put it into earlier layers if we want to. But we can also, so let's say that this is layer 2. We can also say up front that we want layer 2 to come first. And we're just introducing our layer order right at the start. You know, we can introduce whatever layers we want, anything else. We can create any layers that we want, and if new layers are introduced later, they'll just get added to the stack when they're introduced. Yeah, so that gives you some sense. We can also do a thing where we nest layers. So at layer outer, and then we could put all of this stuff inside of it. And it just works the same at every level. But we can also access these layers by saying, from outside, we can say outer.to, and we can add new styles to the outer.to layer or the outer.1 layer. So we've got lots of explicit control now over the cascade importance of different things. We can also import entire style sheets into a layer, sort of create a layer on the fly when we import styles. And that's where nesting becomes really important because so if we say system.css, pull that in and put it in my system layer, and the system.css that we're importing has layers already, theme and components. We just treat those now as nested layers. So in our new document, we now have layer system.theme and system.components that we can keep working with if we want to. So getting started, my recommendations, and this is how I do it, your mileage is absolutely going to vary. The first thing that I do when I'm starting a project or when I'm starting to layer an existing project is I create the layer order I think I will want. And I don't need to get it right, I just have to start somewhere. So I'll create this, and I want it to be the first styles that are applied. Everything else will come later. And I want them to be somewhere easy to find, so we're controlling it from one place. So often, I'll put it directly into the HTML. I'll put it in the head of the document, a little style tag, my layer order, and then I'll start importing style sheets after that, either using the link tag or just using imports. People used to worry about imports because they weren't as performant as links. Browsers have done a lot to improve that. I would say, unless you are in a very special situation about how many styles you're importing and how much performance improvements you need to, how much you need to get into the weeds of that, go ahead with imports if you want. So once I've got my layer order somewhere and I can reference it and adjust it, I'll start layering dependencies first. Dependencies being anything that's not part of the site that I'm working on. So whether that's from a third-party tool or a first-party tool, a design system, something that's coming from our organization, doesn't matter. Any dependency that's not specific to this project, I want to get that prioritized first so that I know how they relate to each other and how I can override them for this project if I need to. So if I'm using something like Bootstrap, I would maybe put it into even bootstrap.core, and then I create my own bootstrap.overrides, and because it came later, my overrides will always win. There, you've fixed the fight you're having with frameworks. You didn't necessarily get that layer order right at the start. You didn't guess right what layers you're going to need. No worries, just update them as you go. Working from lowest to highest. Because every time I create a layer, I'm pulling it down from the unlayered styles. So if I'm going through an existing document, I'm going to start with my lowest specificity styles, and I'm going to pull them into a layer. And now the specificity inside of that layer doesn't matter as much. I can start playing with, I can put ID selectors in that layer. I can do anything I want. But I've pulled those out, I've put them below all the other styles, and then I'll just sort of work my way through the document, creating layers as I go for each chunk, and slowly moving things into their categories. As useful, you can layer inside of components. I do find this useful sometimes. I would not create a layer for each component. That's not quite the right semantics. Components are more of a scope than they are a cascade concept, right? We don't need our button styles to override our link styles or something. We need, instead, within a button, we might have some different types of things. So here I've got some buttons that I've got 3 different styles, default, danger, and info. And then I also have all of them disabled. And we can see that right now, our disabled styles aren't applying. And that's just because of the order of the CSS. But that seems fragile to me. I don't want order to be the important thing here. So I'm going to create, some layers for my buttons. And we can see, actually, I've got some code down here that is already my reset layer. So I put that first. And then I'm going to have some button defaults. So layer defaults. And I'll put just my basic button styles in there. And this is a place where, like, my links can also have stuff in the default layer, and my tabs can have stuff in the default layer. And then I'm also going to have a type. Info and danger are different types, so I'll have a layer type for those. And this will go in layer state. And now I've already said up front that the state layer should win over defaults and over types. And now that conflict is resolved. I haven't done any specificity hacks. It doesn't matter what order my styles are in. I've just been explicit about how I want the cascade to work for me. So maybe all of that would get wrapped into a components layer, and I want components to override my general themes or something. And then I would have components.defaults, components.type, components.style, whatever you want to call them. You create your own layer names. I would not leave things unlayered. I mean, as I'm going, it's not that I need to get the whole thing done before I can start merging this into production, but that I want to not, I could have just left your slide the way you had it, don't leave things unfinished. I would go the whole way. Don't leave things unlayered. For flexibility, we want everything in a layer, because when we have unlayered styles, there's nowhere higher to go. But when everything's in a layer, we can still add more if we need to. So then I would only use unlayered styles sort of in my local development for prototyping and debugging. I know that when I add an unlayered style, it will win over everything, so I can, without having specificity fights, I can just quickly see what's going on. If you're dealing with single file components, no problem. Because you can come back to a layer name and add things to it from anywhere, you can just put layers into your component styles. If you're using Tailwind or CSS in JS, I don't know, man. Like, here's the thing. Use whatever tools are good for you, but if your tools don't let you use the platform, that's not a tool, that's an obstacle. So if you find that when new features come out in HTML or CSS and you're not allowed to use them yet because you're waiting for the update to version 3, like, you're using the wrong tools, find a different tool. Okay, hot take. Use layers to provide clarity. We're trying to describe our intent, like what are these styles for, what are they doing? We're trying to convey the architecture. We're saying we have a design system, we have themes, we have states, and we want them to override each other in these ways. We're trying to communicate that architecture both to the browser and to each other. Not just this is more important than that. In fact, layers are less important. But X should override Y because components override defaults. That's why. Here it is in the code. And we're trying to encourage nuanced and explicit priorities. As long as the intent is clear, there's no harm layering. This is not something where it's going to add to your performance issues, or it's going to you're not getting into specificity wars where it's just going to keep going up and up if you're careful about how you architect this. There's no harm putting things in more layers. And then try to unlearn specificity-driven selectors. We were never supposed to be doing this shit. You don't need to remove all, like, the browser gives you so much naming. And then we come along and we're like, you know what we hate? We hate naming things. Let's make up a convention where we have to name everything. What are we doing? The browser provided a lot of names for us. We can use them. It's great. We can write more expressive selectors, and the selectors themselves can then encourage proper HTML use. We can say, we want you to only get this style if you have correctly used a button and put it in a form, and you have actually a field that is invalid in that form. These are very expressive and powerful tools. We should go back to using them. Don't worry about using the ID selector. It's fine. You're allowed to. Don't worry about using type selectors. It's fine. It's allowed. It's part of the language. It's better to have these things in the code, in the semantics, rather than just written as conventions. It's great to have conventions still, but we don't need to remove all of the semantics to do it. Don't fear specificity, contain it. And then relearn importance as intended too, because like origins, importance reverses the layers. So again, we're trying to bring balance. If we have 3 layers, resets, and then themes and components, components are overriding themes and resets, and then we add importance in them, we get layers reversed. It's the same as origins, and it's going to take some relearning, but this is what importance does. So that means we can put something in a reset that is really important, and we won't be able to override it later, and that's the goal. So it's not for overriding styles that already exist. If we're doing that, we want layers. It's for protecting styles that don't, from other styles that don't exist yet. It's for saying in a low layer, I need to protect this. So one example I have in my reset is the hidden attribute should hide things. I shouldn't come along later and add display flex to a component and have that override the display hidden of the hidden attribute. I want that hidden attribute to apply. So I put it in my reset still. It's still just part of the reset, but I add important to it, and I'm not going to accidentally override that later. So if we're trying to do sort of general prioritization, we want to use layers for that. And it's only if we're trying to protect things that are essential and that shouldn't be overridden, that's when we can use importance. So I can make you a certificate if you need it. You can take it back to your CTO or whatever. Do they care about your CSS? I hope they do. And you can say, I'm allowed to use importance for these things. It's legal. The Cascade is the most powerful tool that we have. It's our friend. All my best slides are stolen. The Cascade exists to balance priorities, to express architecture and intent, and it's getting major upgrades, not just Cascade Layers, but also coming soon, Scopes proximity, which will be cool, but we don't have time for today. Just remember, a Jedi uses the Cascade for knowledge and defense, never for attack. If you want to learn more about this, I'm working on a course. It's not ready yet, but you can sign up if you want updates. And it's going to be all about going into the reason for the way CSS works the way it does, and how to understand it and think about it with a correct mental model, so that it's not just a random mix of strange behaviors. Thank you.